Hello everybody. My name is Steve Philp, and I'm the Partnership Director at Portugal Pathways and your host for today's webinar. We have a very special webinar event today discussing the best places to live and to settle in Portugal. And the many things that you must first consider, such as understanding regional differences and costs, researching property, and integrating yourself into a new community. Our panel of experts will also be taking questions throughout the hour-long webinar, so we encourage you to leave questions and comments as we go through the webinar over the next hour or so. We'll endeavour to answer everybody's questions within this hour, but if we don't get to all of those questions, our team will reply individually after the webinar is over. And again, obviously everyone's got sort of specific scenarios and situations, specific questions around your own circumstances. Again, our team will follow up to arrange a discovery call with one of our experts. So talking of experts, let's introduce today's panel to you. We're delighted to have with us today Colleen Showalter, who is the CEO and the co-founder of Portugal The Place. Portugal Place is a relocation specialist. They focus on helping families and individuals transition smoothly to life in Portugal, and are very much about supporting people with location scouting and researching the right properties. Alongside Colleen, we have Paul Stannard. Now, Paul is the chairman and founder of Portugal Pathways and the Portugal Investment Owners Club. Joining Paul and Colleen, we have Vasco Shumpanli Jardim. Vasco is the CEO and founder of In Loco Property Investments, a real estate as a service organisation in Portugal. The company manages a variety of projects across Portugal. Vasco himself has unparalleled expertise in Portugal's regional and real estate markets, and comes from a family with world-renowned business interests and a well-established reputation here in Portugal. And finally, we have Andreas Pretorius. Andreas sold his UK business and moved to the Algarve a number of years ago, and is now CEO and founder of Pretorius Wealth Management Solutions. And he takes an holistic approach to his work with affluent families coming to Portugal in terms of structuring their assets, so that they're optimized for the long term in Portugal. Andreas and his family have also had to navigate finding the right location, and many of his clients lean on him to understand his learning and journey to Portugal. Andreas has over 25 years experience in wealth management and now supports families in Portugal. Thank you guys for joining us today. So we're here to discuss finding the right place to settle in Portugal. And I'd like to begin with Colleen. Colleen, you have lots of experience in guiding families through the process of finding the right location and researching property. Could you share with the audience, in your opinion, what are the most important factors when choosing where to settle in Portugal? And after you've answered, Colleen, I'm going to get the rest of the panelists really to sort of follow in behind with their thoughts.
Well, thank you. It's a combination of factors, and it's really important that we look at everything from a planning position. If you're intending to make the move to Portugal and look at this as your midterm, long-term new home, we want to, of course, consider your budget and your finances. That is one of the most important and key things, because we don't want to share a location with you that's unreasonable if it doesn't fit within your planned budget. But beyond that, one of the things that we find most important is to talk about what you want your life to look like a year after you've relocated to Portugal. After all the excitement is over, after you've ordered a pizza online and managed to get it on the phone delivered correctly, and you feel like you've kind of made that extra step, what do you want out of your life? Are you retiring? Are you moving with small children? Are you working while you're abroad? You know, all of these factors influence the location that you choose. And so lots of chatter about things like weather and, affordability, livability. All those things are key and important. But at the end of the day, if you don't know what it is that you are looking for your own next step, it could be a way that you could get tripped up. So we really like to look at the location as two pieces: your budget and financial responsibilities and what you are able to relocate to, but then also your long-term goals and if it fits your family and your lifestyle and the things you're hoping to have when you make this change.
Vasco, do you want to come in behind Colleen?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I think obviously everything Colleen talked about is obviously very relevant. From a more property view things, we're developers as well as builders and agents, and so we have inevitably come across a lot of people doing that, coming across that path. And what we see essentially is before making the decision, people want to be clear about how they view their investment. Are they looking for a property which they believe will create value on a medium long term? Is it something they want to pass on to their children, and how that will be structured from a wealth management point of view, and potential exit on that property on a mid long term? Whether they're prepared to go through a development process in a foreign country, and whether they find the right partner to do so, or they prefer something that's ready. So we do think it's very important that people understand what process they want to go through, and not just what life they want to have later here. So deciding on the journey they want to have buying is also quite relevant.
Yeah, good point. And Andreas, obviously you've walked the walk, as it were. So what were the sort of deciding factors for you when you and your family sort of relocated to Portugal?
Thanks, Steve. So I echo what both my colleagues have said there. But for me and my family, we essentially looked at 4 variables, and it was a trade-off. As with all decisions that we make in life, there will be certain trade-offs that you have to make based on the priority that you put to those variables that you consider in moving. So for us, firstly, was climate, which shouldn't come as a surprise with a surname like Pretorius, originally from South Africa, and then having moved and lived in the UK for 20 years. So climate for me and my family was top of the agenda. So that gave us a general idea of the sort of countries that we wanted to go. Portugal for us kind of fitted the mold, closer to South Africa climate than most other places that we had visited. The next decision we had to make was whether we wanted to be rural or urban. And again, growing up on a farm, the proximity to nature, the space around the quiet was another variable that kind of helped us decide the sort of location that we wanted to stay in. Proximity to certain infrastructure that's important at our stage of our life cycle, and primarily for us that was schools, having 2 young kids. So looking at those top 3, you sort of are in a position to start narrowing the sort of areas and the search areas that you feel for you at this stage of your life is what you're looking for. And then we finally had to consider affordability. So you look at all those variables, and ultimately you've got to work within the constraints of all of them, but primarily from a budget perspective. And based on that, you get to go and see a couple of places that meet or get close to meeting all of those criteria. And then it very simply is down to what you feel. Your experience when you see a place, just what it feels like. And we all know more often than not, especially when it comes to things like property and where we want to live and stay, it's what you feel. And if you go against that, you often find yourself saying, I felt this wasn't right, or this was right. So that's been our journey. And then just to touch on one of the the things that Colleen said about, how do you want to see things a year after? I'm happy to share one of the key lessons I learned a year after. And I can just use that in 3 core words: air conditioner, dehumidifier, heaters. So I quickly learned, you warned, you told the stories by locals, and I say absolutely tap into your local knowledge, because the locals do know. But often we also want to kind of bump our own heads. And I tell you what, a year in, I learned those 3 key things, and they made a massive change. So, if you're considering moving here, think of those.
That's a great, it's just funny jumping on that. It's because we're also talking about people that are renting. So I don't often jump into like the investment side, because some folks are putting their toe in the water and they're not ready to make a financial investment that's long-term. And so for those that are looking at renting first, there's no right way to move to Portugal. Some people rent and then buy, and then some people jump right into the purchase process. But for me, when you're looking at a location, I think you're totally correct. It's partly a plan, but it's a lot of emotion. It is what you respond to when you get here. And another example, we came to Alcobaça on the Silver Coast. We came there because our 125-pound dog, that's where we could find an apartment that would rent to us with him when we first arrived. And then we were there for 5 minutes and we were like, what is this place? We love this place. And nothing else hit us as emotionally as this wonderful little area that we landed. But we had no intention. We thought for sure it was 6 months, we buy the place, we go live somewhere else. And it just hit us hard. So it isn't a science, it's an art in finding the location. There's a lot of variables involved.
Absolutely. And Paul, just before we move on, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, try not to sort of say the same things as the rest of the panel, but the quicker you can start thinking Portuguese and thinking like you're not living in an extension of where you came from, is the quickest route to a better journey along that path. And the other thing, you've got a sort of double challenge. We have a lot of calls with people that say, well, I think I'm going to rent for a while and I'm going to tour around a bit, but I'm really worried that prices are rising, they don't build enough properties, and I don't want to get left behind. Well, there's a balancing act there, and so again, they're trade-offs that you've got to work through in your own mind.
Exactly. And it depends on what you have as far as your situation. Most of the folks that we have that come to us to rent that end up purchasing working with us, and they're going through the process, have something that is hard to fit into the mold. Maybe they have multiple pets, or they have multi-generational family, or they have some other element that kind of locks them out of having access to all the rental inventory, and they shift. So your own circumstances really dictate that too, when you're looking at if it's the right time to buy or rent.
Absolutely.
And one other thing I think I'd mention, my background was in media, and I helped build a number of different property portals in different countries. And in America and in the UK, they have MLS systems. So they have a much more regulated system. So you can see all the way each end of the journey in terms of price discovery and all that. That is not as easy to achieve in certain parts of Europe and in Portugal particularly. So sometimes people get lost on these property portals, searching and searching and trying to understand locations with foreign language descriptions of locations. If you think about most people, say from the UK, when they move within 5 miles of where they lived before. That is not going to happen with the majority of people that are probably on this webinar. So it is really important to understand the dynamics and not to get lost in these property portals, because you'll learn more from people like Colleen and Vasco and other people on the ground than you will sometimes try to assess, on a portal with hundreds of properties, some of which won't even be listings that are still available, or they might be, because there isn't an MLS system, people chancing their arm and posting properties on there in the hope of getting leads that they don't even have a mandate for.
Well,
and that's why
it's true, Paul. The portal for location scouting is like the least. You don't want to start looking at houses and then seeing if the location is a good fit. Like that's a weird reverse way to go about it, because I get a lot of clients that are like, this house is amazing. It's 200,000 and everything. And I'm like, yes, but it's in the middle of the Alentejo in a small, very conservative town with an hour and a half drive to the closest amenities and everything. And unless someone's looking for that kind of rural lifestyle, is this what you want? And then you start talking to them about that and they're like, no, I don't want that. So the portals can be really misleading. It can say a town, but of course there's the municipality, the city, the district, they can all have the same name. It gets very confusing. So I would really suggest starting on the location and then working your way to the properties. The other way around can get, you can end up down a lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah, the amount of times we've had people say, just send me properties. and it's just not the way to go about it, because you'll get lots of disappointment going that route.
Definitely. Well, if it's any consolation, I've had sent back to me at least 5 times my apartment that I have sold. It's been reposted by people that don't have permission on some of these portals. And then I'll have clients be like, what about this one? I'm like, I know it's sold. And they're like, how do you know? Because it was mine. So it's hard because the portals can be really distracting. There's really like Vasco and teams like that. There's really reputable builders, people that have depth of recognition of their expertise. And then you've got this whole other element online, and it's hard sometimes to discern which one you can depend on and which one isn't really leading you into the right information.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you were saying, it's a reverse way of doing it. And thank you everyone for that insight. That's really useful. And we obviously talked about location is obviously still the key. But in terms of the property, I would like to sort of dig a bit deeper and ask Vasco, as someone who has lived there all of his life, and his family have a huge business interest, obviously across Portugal. Vasco, what do you most commonly see in the market, especially for international buyers coming to Portugal, or investors as a whole looking to build a portfolio?
Well, in terms of, are we talking about individual clients or talking about?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of in terms of the marketplace itself. Obviously, we're talking. We've got an audience of international buyers here, and potentially investors.
What we see most of the time, I think, without a doubt, over 60-70% will focus on the main urban areas or around that: Lisbon, Porto, to some extent the Silver Coast, and the more urban areas of the Algarve. Those are obviously the more liquid, the more evident and developed areas. We have found more and more, and quite recently, especially after COVID, that people are now looking to secondary locations, which on a first moment weren't at all evident, and now people are open to them. We see, which is quite curious now, all the international buyers that are coming to us, they already tend to know someone in Portugal, directly or indirectly, or they know of someone, and that is a very different way from what happened, say, 10 to 15 years ago, where a lot of these clients had no contact with Portugal. That's not the case now, and so people are more open to explore locations which maybe fit them a lot more when we look in detail, but which on a first search would not be available for them at all. So this is an issue that has to be seen in some level of detail, especially with some support here. But without a doubt, the main urban areas and the traditional ones are where people are building portfolio, purchasing first, and then investing more and more.
Absolutely. Colleen, anything to add in behind what Vasco just said?
Well, it's interesting because 86% of our clients are American. So they're coming out of the North American market, and we're actually finding a spread across the country. And the building has just been, I would say the national bird of Portugal should be the crane, because I swear everywhere you look right now are just building. And I cover the whole country. So we've got people coming to Viana do Castelo and going up to Braga. We have folks spread across the Algarve down through Setúbal, for example, and the Silver Coast, which is running short on inventory. Builders aren't able to keep up with the demand. And what's interesting is Americans don't find things so far away. And I think that's because our country is so enormous. You know, for us, when somebody says they want to be close to Lisbon, an hour, the Silver Coast, an hour and 20 minutes is close to Lisbon for them, because many of us coming out of Los Angeles, Oregon, you know, different places with horrendous traffic, we were used to commuting for 2.5 hours to our jobs, you know, things like that. So it changes the perspective of what the definition of close is. So we found people are getting more comfortable with the idea of Lisbon, maybe not offering everything they want price-wise, or perhaps they're feeling like it's too congested and they start moving out. And so Setúbal has been a huge area of interest right now. It's an area that people are really focusing on in our community. Silver Coast, of course, we get a lot of people because they know we're in the center of it as well. So they have faith in the fact that we know that area. But recently, the last 2 years, the north has just been exploding. Braga, Porto, Gaia, and then Viana do Castelo even. So it's been interesting how from the American, our least interested area for most of our clients is the Algarve. They're actually looking more in other areas.
Very interesting. Thank you, Colleen. Obviously, see our chat is exploding. Lots of questions. I think individual sort of specific inquiries in there. Again, our team will pick those up directly with you offline as well. But again, keep those questions coming and comments in the chat. So moving on, so Portugal itself has many sort of facets, not just property. There's schools, utilities, and tax. But I would like to start talking about cost of living and sort of differences across the regions. Perhaps sort of Paul and Andreas could kick this one off for us. So Paul, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, Steve, I didn't pick the last part of your question.
So we're talking about, sort of cost of living specifically, and the differences across the regions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, location, it can change very quickly from area to area. Obviously, some of the areas in Portugal that are seeing the highest cost of living growth are in places like the Golden Triangle in the Algarve, in places like Cascais, certain districts of central Lisbon. Obviously, you'll see things sort of, a higher rate. But, Portugal as a country as a whole, cost of living is really, really a positive thing for people coming to Portugal. But because of the supply and demand issue around property is probably the one thing that is exponentially growing in terms of the the cost of buying, because there's not enough properties compared with the amount of demand that's growing. And as every day goes politically around the world, we're seeing more and more reasons why that demand. The day after the American election, I know Colleen had the same. Our inbox is lit up, and in the last 5 or 6 days, it's lit up again. Similarly, you take the UK. New government comes in, they decide to do stuff with inheritance tax that's going to be very punitive. But if you live in Portugal and you move and buy assets in Portugal, that is going to be a very positive thing for you if you're going to live there 5 or 10 years and beyond, because Portugal has a very strong and friendly approach to inheritance and gift tax, which I know Andreas could talk to quite a lot. So cost of living is really strong, but also when you're coming in, indirect taxes, it's not just the the income tax and the cost of living. You've got to weigh up all of the elements. And when you do that, Portugal is still very attractive, even in some of the what I'd call hot markets of Portugal.
Well, it's comparable, Paul, and the cost of living, again, speaking from the American perspective, because the British have a very different connection with healthcare. From an American, you can't express enough what a change it is with private health insurance in Portugal, not even talking about the public system, but just having access to quality healthcare through the private system, the cost of the insurance, the cost of prescriptions, all of your incidental medical care. It's just a game changer. So for a lot of folks that are looking for cost of living, they're factoring from the US side, not just electricity bills and cost of fuel. And fuel always throws us for a loop because we pay in gallons like nothing compared to Europe. So that one's always a little hard. But as far as the balance, it's really something people have to look at. Also, at least if I'm speaking out to the Americans, we have a huge difference. Cost of living changes from the West Coast. It's a great savings. If you're coming from middle America, it doesn't feel like as much savings because the US is very different market to market as well. So cost of living really depends on where you're coming from too.
Thank you. Andreas, to sort of move on a little bit, what are the sort of key considerations to sort of families and investors keep in mind when moving to Portugal? I know that you've got a very holistic approach to people managing their lives. So if a client comes to you and sort of says, before I buy a property, I want to understand what tax implications and the cross-border considerations I should look at before I take a plunge and invest in the property. So what would your sort of approach and advice be on that?
Thanks for the question. So let's take that example on looking to buy a property. I think you first got to define what is the purpose of buying the property, because that will determine what are the variables that you need to assess in terms of the decision. So you can typically split a question like that or a consideration like that into buying a property to live in or buying a property as an investment. And so if you were looking to buy a property to live in, and I'll touch on the cross-border and the taxation for a second, but getting back to the grassroots reasoning, the first thing you've got to recognize is that is an investment within yourself. That's an investment in you. It's an investment in your well-being. And so the type of questions you would probably be looking to answer is, why are you looking to buy that, where that property is? Is it in a proximity to the sort of activities that you would want to do at that stage of your life? Is there a premium associated with buying that property, and how do you value that? Because it becomes a lot more of an intangible analysis. You contrast that with buying a property for investment. And let me just go back to the first one. The opportunity cost of buying that property to live in can actually be measured against what are you giving up in terms of quality of life, in terms of the funding to purchase that property as an investment in you. So if you contrast that with buying a property as an investment, then we start looking at different types of questions in total. What is the cost of that property? What is the expected outcome? What are you looking to achieve by buying that property? So you've got to have an expectation of an outcome, an expectation of a return. What are all the initial costs associated with that property? What are the maintenance costs associated with that property? And now when we talk about the opportunity cost of purchasing that property, it is measurable relative to what another investment could provide you. So you have a very different approach in terms of assessing the viability, the outcomes, and your expectations in assessing first, why am I buying this property and what's the purpose for it? Then the tax becomes a little bit or less relevant. If you're buying a property to live in, is taxation the primary driver? No. Is it a core variable? Possibly not. Is it a consideration? Yes. When you're buying a property to invest, it becomes more of a variable because there is an impact in the expectations of outcomes, the period that you want to hold it and sell it on. What are the taxation implications then? that becomes a lot more meaningful in trying to assess how that impacts your decision making. So, using that approach, you can clearly define a lot more as to which property you want to look at buying and why. And that's how I go about helping clients with that.
And maybe just chip in for a second, if it's possible. I'm obviously, this is what Andreas said, I completely agree with. That's, I guess, a step back. If we're already in a decision where people say, I want to buy, I'm deciding where, why, what ticket. What we see is obviously when people are analyzing purely from an investment standpoint, that's more rational analysis, and we're looking if it's income generating, if we want to add value and resell or whatever it may be. But what we also hear from people, and which we completely identify with, is yes, I'm buying for me if it's the case. I'll live there, my family will live there, but we want to invest properly, and we want to make sure that if life changes in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, am I able to resell my property? How liquid is it? Or can I rent it, or whatever it may be. But obviously, even when we're analyzing the purchase for ourselves, and there's a very emotional side to things, people want to have a clear analysis on what they're buying and what the outcome will be if life changes.
I also
thank you.
I just wanted to point out real quick too, though, because we're talking about location, choosing a location on this, and I'm looking at the poll and the amount of people, there are a lot of folks that are also talking about like the rental side of it, and if it's possible to relocate. And I know it's important because right now it's a hot market. There's a lot of opportunities for investment, but you can come to Portugal and plan to rent for an extended period of time. You don't have to purchase a house to move to Portugal. And I don't want to lose track of that, because this really is about choosing your location, and there's no pressure. You don't have to purchase. And so if you're looking to move to Portugal and you're trying to determine the location, if you're looking for a rental, you're thinking that's what works for you and your family, there are opportunities. Now, the rentals, they create a different set of circumstances and concerns and things you have to plan for. And you may need to be more flexible if you're looking for a rental, because your inventory right now is incredibly limited. There's a lot of challenges with finding them. But I don't want that to keep people from thinking they can't move to Portugal. And I just wanted to bring us back to the location side of this, because it's about, finding the place that works for you in Portugal. And if that's a rental, it's still viable. It's still an option, but you may need to explore areas that you didn't consider the first time around.
I mean, just backing up what Colleen said, we've had a number of clients that have gone through developers and they've gone for the rental thing for 6 months, a year or whatever. Picked a location, but they've then gone and looked for some off-plan deals because they've got the capital to do it, and they've taken a view that they're going to have something off-plan, that they're going to pay a deposit. The European LIBOR rate is lower than, say, the UK and other areas, and they might choose to then have those as investments or flip them. So they don't miss out on the market, and they can do a mix of both. So it's very much about sitting down with people that have walked this path.
And you have to have the pre-planned, you're right, Paul, but the pre-plans will not allow you to use those for the visa application. So a key piece of this, if you're relocating, you do have to consider a rental. If you've invested in a pre-plan, if it's not going to be available for habitation when you're planning to locate after you apply, you must have accommodation that you can move to. So you may be a rental and then a purchase. You may be a pre-plan while you're renting. You may be renting, or you may just purchase. There's a variety of ways to enter the market, but it depends on what your long-term plans are.
Lovely. Okay, I'm really conscious that we've got a really engaged audience here, and we've got a lot to get through in terms of from a topic point of view. I just want to sort of move on a little bit and just sort of touch on the subject of thinking early, so planning early and thinking like you're Portuguese. when you're obviously looking or considering your sort of relocation. So, Colleen, perhaps you could sort of start us off on this point of sort of like that early planning, in particular, thinking in the mindset of a Portuguese.
Well, it's interesting to say that because I'm not Portuguese, I'm American. And I am trying really hard. I'm learning the language. I am working through the cultural adjustments. But the thing I can say is for whoever's looking to move to Portugal, if you're not Portuguese, you are going to come and adapt. There is no expectation that the Portuguese should adapt to you. Now, saying that, the Portuguese are some of the most welcoming and kind people that I have encountered. And I love living in Portugal because of that. But I get a little frustrated and I get a little hot under the collar here. So just bear with me because I have seen a lot of social media posts. There was just an article that went out on, I believe it was Condé Nast and CNN that are running some about people that have left because it was, they didn't have the conveniences. It wasn't like they expected. They couldn't find their things from their home country there. And that really frustrates me because at the end of the day, you are moving your whole entire life to another country. And so to think in the Portuguese manner is not reality. I'm American. I don't have a point of reference to be Portuguese, but I do have a point of reference of learning and adapting and preparing for the fact that I need to be uncomfortable. And I think when you're looking for the location, if you are really nervous about things like language or finding folks to connect with that are from a different background, you may want to focus your location search around areas with more international communities. But if you're looking for an opportunity to really immerse yourself in the culture and you really want to learn that language, moving into other parts of the country will open a lot of different options for you. But the point that I always like to stress when it comes to thinking about Portuguese, to be in the Portuguese mindset, for me, means that I'm constantly slightly uncomfortable because I have to make sure that I'm thinking in the best way possible. Am I putting my American lens on this? Am I trying to force something to be that isn't? Why am I finding myself in a challenging situation? And most of the time it's because I built up an expectation that isn't realistic just due to the differences for whatever it is. So thinking Portuguese for me is about letting go of anything that I think I know and just learning in the moment and understanding where I'm at the moment. Not easy. It is not something that's going to happen immediately, but as, again, someone coming from another country and being 5 years in Portugal, I can say that I can find myself balancing both now, but it took a little time. It took a couple years before I got in the rhythm. And I think Andreas probably, we're on that same track, right? Like, it's like, it takes a bit to adjust to letting go of what you think you know.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with everything you said. Two words come to mind for me: integrate and adapt. And it's that would be the same case no matter where you went. And as Pauline said, one of the great benefits of Portugal is generally the Portuguese are extremely welcoming and friendly. I have not had any encounter or situation where I would ask a local to explain to me what the answer would be in Portuguese. They would be very open and they receive that very well. So it's recognizing that you have to integrate, you have to adapt to your surroundings. And, it comes down to just core human courtesy of what you would extend in your host country, if we can call it that, and that goes a long way.
Thank you, everyone. Just sort of moving along in terms of the narrative for today's sort of webinar. I'll come to you, Vasco. Obviously, your organisation specialises in luxury real estate property. When supporting international buyers to find their ideal property or potentially want to build something bespoke, what sort of considerations do they need to think about, such as sort of reselling, liquidity, dependent on the location, cost of build, planning, etc.? Are they all sort of top of mind?
Yeah, what we see clearly is once the decision is made, people, in terms of where to invest, people tend to focus on finding the right partner to manage the process, or to be their foot in Portugal. That seems like the best way forward for people to have somewhere to lean on. Then obviously, if they intend to develop a property, say buy a plot and build a house, or whatever it may be, then that point of contact usually is an open door for them to find the architects, the engineers, builders, and so essentially the first thing that people focus on, and this is something that we've been coming across time and time after, is how do we identify a party to lean on, and to what extent will then that open the doors for the rest. And this is whether they want to develop or whether they want to buy something which is ready, off plan or ready to move. But what we really think is, if people have this first nucleus of contacts which they rely on, where there's a transparent relationship, then the whole thing builds on itself, and it makes a lot more sense for people to be motivated and feel confident to move forward.
Thank you, Vasco. Again, just moving on a little bit further, I'm going to come to you, Paul. I've got a question really around the sort of main differences in sort of market trends from a sort of prime resident or investment perspective, and between the sort of Lisbon area, the Algarve, Porto, and obviously other regions that are out there. Obviously, Colleen mentioned Silver Coast. Just wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Well, it does. We can talk about the regions, and the panel have discussed this, from the start, really, location, but they all offer something different. Some people want the Algarve, they want the south, they want the sunshine, but you've also then got other people. I've been on calls with Vasco and Colleen with clients where I've had a client say, well, I'm thinking of Sintra. Well, you have to think there, it's very humid, it's very wet, it can get very busy at certain times of the year, and summer. And if you don't want a wet climate, then that's maybe not right for you. You then get the sort of the shiny magpie, like Cascais. I want to live. Everybody wants to. I want Cascais. I want the Golden Triangle. But actually, what they should be asking, what do I want out of life, and work it back from there. So, what kind of life do I want to lead? What does my family want? What's important to me? Am I going to be working? What access do I need to healthcare? What access do I need to airports? All of those things. There's so many different elements, and having the right partners like Colleen, like Vasco, and having people that you can lean on to understand that, at least you're going to get a little bit more direction and peace of mind rather than lost in this process. So it's a very hard one to go for. Places like Braga in the north are becoming very, very strong. They've got very sort of a collegiate sort of multicultural environment. There's a tech scene there. There's a nanotechnology institute, so there's a lot of academics. And also with this new tax regime that's coming in, which is very friendly to professionals and value creators, I think you're going to see that dynamic evolving again. So whereas, when the wave started post the financial crisis, it was very much, trying to attract wealth to buy property. It was more lean to retirees. Now that mix is changing. You've got 25-year-olds and 70-year-olds all considering, so how do you decide that? You've got to take that holistic approach, really.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I really will sort of change tack. We've mentioned, a number of these sort of areas throughout the webinar to date. And Paul, I know that we've got a few slides from a recent report from Property Market Index, as well as some other data on how Portugal's property market is interacted and performing. And it would be good really just to get a few words from the rest of the panel in terms of what they're seeing on the ground as we move sort of further into sort of 2025 and beyond. So I'm going to get these slides up for you, and in 2 seconds. Just let me know, Paul, when you want to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, if you can move on. Yeah, I mean, Property Market Index is an international research company that looks at different international markets for property, and it does a report twice a year on Portugal. And what you're seeing is high demand, low output, because there's not enough properties. There's been some recent news about more properties coming on the market, but that takes time. Lisbon, in particular, I know there was some news on Vasco's website about about 10,000 properties in Lisbon. But the reality of it is, it's an upward market because regeneration is coming in. So Portugal is becoming a stronger market economy because it's outperforming the Eurozone in terms of GDP growth at the moment, declining inflation, and a lot of people that want to come for investment and life reasons. So all of those trends are driven by the culture, the education, investment potential, but then are limited by land availability. There's a lot of we're working with a lot of the investment funds in Portugal for Golden Visa, and the European Investment Fund, which probably would have invested in more economies, Germany, France, and Britain before it decided to leave the EU. But now you're seeing biotech funds that are getting like 50 million lead investment because of biotech, because it's changing, and that's impacting a number of different sectors. And the property one, in the last quarter of 2024, it was really steep growth in terms of capital values. And I see that one of the property portals last week reported that the first January alone had seen another spike. So I don't think that is going to change, not in the short, medium or long term, especially with what's going on geopolitically, or unless something, God forbid, really bad happens, but none of us can control that one. Steve, the next slide. And this is just an indicator, just to show, how some of the more established markets like North America, UK, and Europe, have even seen some decline overall in the value of property. But Portugal, particularly in the higher end, because there's money coming to the country, then 10 homes sold for every one built, needs more supply. And I know the government are trying to look at more schemes in terms of social housing, and probably Vasco can talk more to that. It's a strong market.
Vasco, do you want to sort of come in behind Paul on that one?
Absolutely. Following on what Paul just said, I mean, it's clear that there is low demand. There is since the new government came into power end of last year, substantial changes to legislation have been done, and there is an enormous change in getting approvals for planning to be done in a more expedite manner, and this is effectively having a change. I mean, since a new regime came into place to simplify the planning process, we have seen projects, either individual housing or multifamily housing, which was taking year and a half to get approvals, is now getting approved in 3.5 months. So there is a substantial difference, and this is already having a positive impact on the stock available. But inevitably, there will be a lot more demand than there is supply for the next years. And although we're addressing the issue, we're not going to get it solved completely straight away. We don't think, also from a demand standpoint, that it's going to stop. I mean, Portugal is now becoming known in the US. I remember 5 years ago, the first times we went to the US to promote Portugal as a destination, and some of the projects we work with, I would say over 80% had no contact with Portugal or the idea of Portugal at all, and now 70% do. So, and this is just the US market alone. So there is a huge path to be done, and I think the country is putting together the tools to be able to get property developed and ready to be sold.
Thanks for that insight, Paul and Vasco. That was really interesting. Now, I'd like to sort of move on really and look at some of the regions that we obviously mentioned earlier in the webinar. And we have a number of slides and maps, and we've highlighted a few locations that are either hotspots for property or are currently in vogue. And it'd be great really to get sort of Colleen and Vasco's input on these, in particular when it comes to sort of picking the right locations in those regions. So we are going to work our way up the country. We're going to start with the sunny Algarve. Now, as you're probably aware, the Algarve is broken into some defined regions, as this sort of slide will illustrate in a minute, from eastern to western Algarve. And obviously we've got another slide that sort of deals with the Algarve's Golden Triangle, as well as the areas such as Albufeira and Faro. The regional capital and where the international transport is located, as is in that case in Faro. So perhaps we could ask the panel, starting with Paul and Andreas, in terms of their sort of knowledge and insight into the Algarve and sort of some of the different nuances based on these two slides. Let me just get those slides up so you can use them as a reference point. So give me 2 seconds. So we have there, obviously, the Algarve broken up into those three regions that I mentioned. So Colleen, do you want to sort of take that one on for me?
Did you want me? I'm sorry. I thought you were starting with Paul.
You said Paul and then you.
Sorry. No, I got myself a little bit lost there. Sorry, Paul. Yeah. So
I'm happy to do. Paul and Andreas.
Yeah. Well, I'll do the high level, and then everybody can dig in. Basically, I mean, as you see on this map, we could go into the detail, and in an hour you can't do the whole country. But the Algarve is made up of Western Algarve, which is a market that's a little bit more remote than say Central or the Golden Triangle region near Faro. But in terms of the Algarve, you'll get more value in places like Eastern Algarve and Western Algarve or the Central Algarve than you will in the Golden Triangle areas where Almansil, Quinta do Lago, and in terms of cost of living. And if you want more of an experience in terms of a lesser new money homogenized situation that you get in some of these built up areas of the Golden Triangle, it depends what you want out of life. I'm a big fan personally, from a personal thing, in terms of the Central Algarve. My family happens to own a number of properties there. But I think Lagos in the west, which is just on the edge of the west, I think it's third highest cost per square meter now. So it's changing a lot. But I'll let others speak.
Yeah,
I was just going to add and say there are also some localized differences in terms of where concentration of certain expats are across the Algarve. From Lagos to Tavira, you tend to have different expat groups tend to be closer to each other, and they're different in those different areas. But a very striking difference across the Algarve is right on the beachfront, where you have, starting on the one side, Tavira and so forth, you have the Ria Formosa, you have a lot more sandier beaches, whereas when you get closer to Lagos and all the way from Albufeira down to Sagres, you have a lot more cliff tops. So the diverse nature of even just the beach experience is quite noticeable. And then, of course, if you happen to be a surfer, you will find on the coast where Sagres and Lagos and so forth, you'll find most certainly a much better swell than you'll find where I'm typically from, which is close to the Tavira side. It doesn't mean that there's not some surf, but it's not nearly anything like the other side of the Algarve. So, very noticeable in terms of just those geographical differences.
Yeah, and again, I don't know, Andreas, I want to sort of keep with you with regards to the Algarve, and really just move on to the sort of second slide, obviously, to talk around sort of Golden Triangle, in particular, sort of Faro and that Albufeira region.
Yeah, so even within that area, so what you see on the map there, it's extremely diverse. You look at the Golden Triangle, and it doesn't typically look like what you would expect, rural or natural Portugal to look like, but barely 15 minutes out, and you find yourself, if you look at Santa Barbara the next, which is bolded out a little bit more there, which is not that far from the Golden Triangle, you back again in almost the rural countryside. So one can almost describe the entire Algarve as countrified living, but there are these pockets of urbanizations which tend to kind of look a little bit more what people may be used to in some of their host countries. And that theme plays across the entire Algarve.
Thank you, Andreas. So we're just going to move up the country slightly and sort of move north towards Lisbon. And I'm going to bring in Colleen and Vasco with regards to that. Again, we've sort of highlighted a few areas on the map to debate. So I'm just going to bring that up. Give me 2 seconds. Technical difficulties. There we go.
Yeah.
And Vasco, if you want to talk to this area, then I'll bring Colleen in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the main I'd say division here is north and south of the river Tejo here. So essentially, right in the city center, we have I would say the majority of our foreign clients coming in. It's where you have the more historical centers and the developed city. And then towards the west of that, on the left, we have the westernmost point in Europe. And so between that and city center Lisbon, you have Cascais, which Paul mentioned, and Estoril, which are obviously very, very well known as a high luxury market, where you're 30 minutes from Lisbon. You have Sintra, which you're 35 minutes from Lisbon. And that's a historical town, quite touristic, so with those particularities. And then to the north and east of of Lisbon city center. You have metropolitan Lisbon, more traditional high density construction. Then to the south of the river, towards Almada, Costa da Caparica, is I would say an up and coming area. It's obviously been there as for many years. It's a way people can live very close to city center at a much lower cost. But it is also becoming a hotspot for international buyers who want to be very close to amazing beaches, as well as all this area towards the south of Lisbon, Rábida, Setúbal, all this area, but as well very close to Lisbon's international airport, the healthcare around it. So I would say this is the main division here on a high level.
And obviously, just moving on, I'm really conscious of the time, and just to reassure everybody that's on the webinar today, it looks like we are going to go over. We've been obviously talking in depth throughout this webinar. We've still got a few sort of areas that we want to touch on, but rest assured, if you do need to leave before the end, that this will be recorded, and we will get the whole today's webinar in a replay across to you within the next 24 hours or so. So, Clean, I'm going to come on to you, and I'm going to talk a little bit more on central Lisbon. And again, I've got a couple of little maps here really for you to sort of talk around. So just get those ones up. 2 seconds.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you're pulling the central Lisbon up here, because with the clients that I'm working with, Chiado, Principal Real, all of these areas have a lot of qualities, and they're very well known. But from a pricing standpoint and investment standpoint, they're something that people are really starting to look a little more for other up and coming neighborhoods, because it's getting harder and harder to get into these areas. If you're purchasing, these areas are a budget consideration for sure. If you're renting, this is something where you need to come and be willing to pay, because this is the areas that everybody is trying to get into in the Lisboa district, including like Saldanha, for example, Saldanha, Torrique, there's the Estrela. These areas are really pulling a lot of people's attention, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the market. One thing I can tell you from our buyers and from our renters as well, what they're looking for is the dream of walkability. They want to live somewhere where they can live a car-free lifestyle, that they don't have to depend on transportation of their own. And so the new metro line that's going in is going to change. And Vasco, I'd love your opinion on this, because this is something that our clients are talking about. Where do they get in now, knowing that there's going to be more transportation options down the road?
Yeah, you mean as in city center, or?
Well, in Estrela, and what's going on out in those neighborhoods connecting, because that's where a lot of our focuses are going, for people to snag areas that aren't yet connected but will be connected.
Sure. I mean, as you rightly say, there will be new connections. They're being started or planned to be started soon. The traditional Bairro Alto, Príncipe Real, Chiado, as you well say, is extremely hard to find. We're still working on a variety of projects there, but budget and space has been a limitation, essentially for Americans. That's clear. In the last 2-3 years, the inflow of Americans has been consistent with feedback. And so what we see is Avenidas Novas towards Saldanha, that's an evident move, which people recognize as a valuable option, which works and ticks most of the boxes. And then, as you say, Lapa, Estrela, these areas, we've been putting on the market some new projects there through our agency.
It's really true too, because what you're saying, it's walkability too, right? Because Chiado, Principal Real, all these places are beautiful, but there's other areas like Saldanha, which is actually flat, and you can walk. So depending, Lisbon has.
You're a 10-minute walk
Exactly.
any other place. And so, again, as you said in the beginning, especially for Americans and even for UK based, which live in high density areas, a 20 minutes walk is nothing, or an hour commute is nothing. And so this has clearly been the case, and the shift from the typical Príncipe Real Chiado towards these ancillary areas has been clear, and it's here to stay.
And for the rest on this, I see someone in the comments, Neil was asking about Araceris because he's out in Cascais. And we're starting to see, I was just out with clients in Sintra, because we've got our kids, a lot of folks coming for the international schools, looking for the different school options and TASIS and the different school campuses. Sintra is a vast area. You have to be careful, because if somebody says they want to live in Sintra, you could be in a variety of types of housing in Sintra. You could be in the beach area. You can be in like a urban, vertical, dense area. Sintra is a whole thing against Cascais, coming up against Cascais. So you really need to really think about what part, if it's a school that you're looking for. And then moving out towards Araceris, Torres Vedras, Mafra, that kind of top part of the Lisboa district, really getting to be much, much more popular. But that's when you're moving away from anything that would be considered urban. You're driving on roads that are not full motorways all the time. You're going to have to make some connections. And there is an international school in Torres Vedras, which serves Araceris and Mafra, but you are changing the lifestyle. It is not like Cascais. Araceris is up and coming, but without that train connection, without that historic element, Araceris will always be what it is, a beautiful beach town on the other side of the Sintra mountain. But Cascais, Estoril, Pared, Carcavelos, all of that is connected to Lisboa in a way that makes that the investment, and it's all location, right? It's location. So Neil, you were asking about it. I don't ever see Araceris pushing anywhere close to what you get in the Cascais, Estoril area.
Thank you, Colleen and Vasco. I'm going to stay with you guys. I'm going to lean on your expertise to talk around, obviously, the up-and-coming area that is obviously the Silver Coast region. Obviously, Colleen, you've intimated that you fell in love with that place. So I've got a couple of more slides here, really, just to show you, and so you and Vasco can sort of talk around these.
Yeah, the Silver Coast is a marketing term, first off, so everyone knows that people jump in all the time on what they think. I've seen people say that Porto was in the Silver Coast. I've seen people put all kinds of places, but in my understanding, when it was originally coined, it was the Leiria district coastline, kind of from Peniche up to Leiria, running along that coastline. Now, occasionally you'll see Figueira da Foz jump in, but in general, it's this kind of section of the coastline that is in the Leiria district. So Peniche is that little peninsula that you see at the bottom of the map there, Nazaré up to Figueira da Foz. What I can say from living on the Silver Coast and being involved in the real estate development there for the last 5 years is it is expanding in a measured way, but there are three crown jewels of the Silver Coast. You have Nazaré, which is famous for the big wave. It's getting a lot of attention because of the surf, international surf community, and it has a year-round economy. Because the surfing is from October to March, it actually has a vibrant beach community that goes all year round. So it's a very different feel than some of the other towns that become very seasonal. You also have Caldas Serena and Foz de Orella, the Óbidos Lagoon, all of that area, which gives people options with golf now. You have a lot of developments now that are providing another option to having to be down in the Algarve if you're a golfer. And there's a lot of developments going in all around the lagoon, which provides a lifestyle for people if they're outdoor, paddle boarding and all kinds of water activities. And then you have Leiria, which Vasco, I don't know how familiar you are with Leiria, but it's always one of those cities that I think people are really surprised by because it doesn't hit the tourist maps. It's not a destination that people are going on motor coaches to, but it's a vibrant capital city of the district. It has the government seat, big hospitals. It's got a new private hospital being built there, and it has a university. So it can provide quite a robust feel when you're there without the intensity of some of the larger urban areas, and it has international schools. So the locations on the Silver Coast, whether you're renting or purchasing, what you're trying to find in your lifestyle can be varied. The number one key thing is you will not live a car-free lifestyle on the Silver Coast. That is just absolutely 100% free. If you don't want a car, you could do it. You could live in one of these towns, but you'd be limited to the town, and then you'd be taking buses, and depending on bus schedules, there is no, you'll see trains. It gets you because you see the trains, but they're like little village trains that stop. It takes like 4 hours to go to Lisbon from anywhere on the Silver Coast by train. So that's the trade-off. You get a great price, great lifestyle, but you have to have a car.
I agree.
Pascal, do you want anything you want to come onto that?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty clear about Silver Coast. That's exactly it.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously there's quite clearly a lot of value obviously in the Silver Coast market. Sorry, Colleen, you come back in?
Just real quickly, Donna Ann was asking what town was on the Silver Coast that is vibrant but not getting motor coach tourists, and that's Leiria. It's the capital city of the district of Leiria.
Yeah, well, we've had a lot of value obviously in this sort of emerging Silver Coast market. I now want to sort of move on to and head up to the sort of northern Portugal and look at Porto and other locations like Braga, for example. I know we've got some Q&A questions to get to, but before we get to that, again, Vasco, can you talk to the next couple of slides? First one being around Porto.
I think talking about the north, we need to start by Porto. Porto is obviously the main, it's the second largest city in the country, and it is the capital of Porto district. It is relatively close to Braga, which you've curiously been mentioning more and more, and I agree. It's buzzing. It has a very particular vibe, and there's a lot going on. But it has one particularity. I mean, you are in Braga, and you are physically far away from many other places. In Porto, you're in a relatively large city, which on the city center we're talking about around 500,000 people, but it is essentially where most of the real estate buzz is now. It is the same ticket will get you more in Porto than it will get in the equivalent neighborhoods of Lisbon, if we do a simple comparison. We have a variety of projects for sale in Porto, and from an investment standpoint, there's more and more interest in Porto, and the demand is huge. I mean, we have people starting their search in Lisbon, as typically they would, Americans, UK, Canada, and then rapidly they shift to Porto, and it's clear why. From an investment standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint, the city talks for itself. So it's a very interesting option B when you're considering Lisbon or Porto. It's very good.
And obviously you just touched on Braga. Do you want to quickly just talk around that?
Yeah, I mean, Braga is a historical city center. Is beautiful. It has a very, very particular business scene and tech scene, which is up and coming and becoming very relevant. It is extremely international, and you are close to Porto, but from in terms of people who come from abroad and tend to have one common particularity, which is these people tend to travel a lot. It is not the most obvious destination in that sense. It would be for someone who wants to have a particular tech scene around them, who doesn't want to overpay for property. So that's something you can do. But in terms of the typical client who comes from, say the US or the UK, and wants to buy in Lisbon or Porto or Cascais, because from their base in Europe, they can then hop around Europe and go back to the US, for example. That's not something you can do easily from Braga, but it's a beautiful place.
Brilliant. Thank you, Colleen and Vasco. That was a really insightful, interesting look at those particular regions. Obviously, we're fully aware that there are plenty of other opportunities and regions within Portugal, but we haven't maybe got the time really to cover those today. However, just to remind you all that if you'd like a one-to-one meeting with Colleen or Vasco or Andreas or ourselves, please use and see the link in the chat and make contact with us. Give us a little bit of an idea about your background and your needs, and we will put you in contact with those people. Just before we sort of move on to Q&A, I'm really conscious, obviously, we've gone over, but we're very detailed, and thank you for those that have stayed with us. And for those, as I said, who can't, we'll obviously get that recording across to you. Just before we go on to the Q&A, I'd really just like to sort of bring Paul and Andreas into the conversation and talk about the market and how maybe Portugal is sort of punching above its weight in terms of the likes of the UK and the EU and other international markets, both from sort of a GDP growth and inflation perspective. Now, I know that obviously people like Ernst & Young recently wrote a report at the end of 2024 saying, obviously, confirming really that the investor confidence in Portugal was at an all-time high. Sort of coming to sort of Paul and Andreas, just wondering what your sort of thoughts and what your thoughts are, where Portugal has been, maybe how it's come through sort of 2024 and what's ahead of us, from a market perspective. Andreas?
Yeah, I mean, Vasco and his family, can go way back before, financial crisis. Their family have been around the country for, centuries. But what we've seen since the financial crash, and more recently, if people had said in terms of Portugal as a place to invest around the financial crash in 2007, like Greece, it would have been very low down the places to, place your investments and where you'd like, it was more about how it was going to, stay within the Eurozone and survive and through that. And what it did with the NHR tax regime and what it did with Golden Visa, it has created a different, and then all of the best elements of Portugal are now, starting to shine through. And we touched on this earlier, so I'm quite sort of conscious of the time that we've got on the webinar. But Portugal is in a really good spot at the moment, and I think some of its history and its heritage and some of its sort of bureaucracy almost in some ways sort of self-protects it from spoiling some of the benefits as well. I mean, Vasco might have slightly different opinion of that or whatever, but I think it's in a really strong place.
No, just to chip in and clarify, because I have insisted or mentioned that things are speeding up and becoming more efficient. That's absolutely clear. But it's also important to understand that the planning law here protects the cities, protects the rural areas, and I have had many discussions with many people over recent years, in the sense that Portugal needs to learn the lessons from other European countries which had amazing cultural heritages and natural heritages which they destroyed with over construction, over tourism. And I really truly believe Portugal is going in the correct direction, and we're not overbuilding, we're not building in an uncontrolled manner, and we are really taking into consideration what happened in other stress points throughout Europe, and trying to do this properly. That's something that I don't think is in opposition to having a leaner process. We need a leaner process. We need things to move forward quicker and more efficiently, but we're not doing that by sacrificing and overbuilding. Just to clarify that, Paul, and give you some peace of mind.
Very good.
And just before we move on to the sort of Q&A, Andreas, is there anything that you want to sort of add to that one?
Yeah, I would just say, as we continue to see FDI flows, so foreign direct investment flows into Portugal, we can also have a clearer idea of the direction of travel from the government with their incentives. Yes, we saw the end of the NHR, but we've seen how the follow-on to that is now a lot clearer, and it's indicative of where they are looking to go next steps, and then finally moving on from the crisis that various of the Eurozone economies emerged from. There is a definite increase in efficiency and productivity within in the Portuguese market, and that is standing them in good stead. So, these trends seem to be just continuing to head in the right direction, and long may do so.
Thank you, Andreas. Now, I'm conscious. I said, okay, and I keep saying it, but that we've run over. Also, obviously, we've shown and put up a number of slides in today's webinar. Again, those along with the replay will be sent out to you, so you can obviously take a little bit more time to digest and those. And obviously, if you've got any questions following receiving both the replay and or the slides, then please obviously reach out to us, and we'll put you in contact with the right person or answer those questions to you. So I'm going to jump into the Q&As and just have a quick look down here at a couple of them. I'm going to go to for Vasco from Amanda. Amanda's asking, she said that she's read that Portugal doesn't build enough homes, which drives the marketplace up with so much international money coming in. She says, I did read last week that 10,000 new homes are proposed to be built in Lisbon. And I wondered if Vasco could give us any insight into the types of developments and luxury development landscape in general.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to clarify one thing. We are undersupplied as a country. And obviously, there's a high demand from locals and domestic and international clients. But it's important that we understand the international chunk of the market is still relatively small in the overall picture. I mean, especially it's still a very small percentage of the whole market if you compare with Spain or France or whatnot. So it's growing. It seems like a lot of buzz, but if you look at the actual numbers, to give you an idea, we had around 4% while the property was still golden visa, were still for property. Only 4% of our clients were interested in a golden visa because only 18% were international. So obviously it's growing. Obviously there's a lot of international people, but the overall weight is not that large. So there's still a lot of space. In terms of what we need to build on all segments of the market. That's clear. We particularly need to build for the middle class. That's absolutely clear. And so this will be in areas which are typically focused for the Portuguese markets, in outskirts of large cities. This, in our view, will be the bulk of the construction, and that's to answer the bulk of the problem, if you like. But obviously we need high end, we need mid-high, and we need mid-market developments in terms of the luxury market, or what we say the upscale market for 450, 500 upwards. There are projects coming up. They do get sold out very fast, but they are being replaced, and there is product in the pipeline for the next 3 to 4 years for sure. So I think there will be supply for this market that our potential foreign investors will focus on, but it will inevitably maintain this incremental price over time. So we don't think prices will start to decrease anytime soon.
Thank you, Vasco. Thank you. Just got a couple more questions before we're going to wrap up today. And this is one for Andreas. Andreas, Amelia is asking that she's fairly sure that she's going to be relocating to the central Algarve, but have significant assets in the UK along with a pension. She managed actually to get NHR tax status before it closed, obviously at the end of last year, but she's worried about inheritance tax changes in the UK coming in April and it having an impact on the money that she will have in Portugal. Yeah. Is there any sort of advice you could maybe give her, the wider audience?
Well, again, thank you for the question. And firstly, congratulations on getting the NHR, or the old form of the NHR. The changes from, and this is particular to the UK. So for those in the audience that are from the UK, this will be more pertinent to yourselves, and or for those who are moving back to the UK or going to the UK for the first time. The changes brought about back in, a little while back now, but that comes effective now in April. This will relate to yourselves. So there is not nearly enough time to go into the meat and the bones of the changes. But let me tell you the sort of framework that you can follow to assess what is the impact, if any, on me. So the first part of your question, just to answer that, there should not be any real impact on the money that you have moving to the UK at this stage, because it is essentially a tax on your passing. So the framework that I suggest clients consider is firstly identifying, what is the change? Understanding the difference between the current domicile nature of inheritance tax and the new residence-based taxation system. So understanding what that really means. Then being in a position to assess how does that impact you. Thirdly, considering what are the options. So there are a number of options that are available. And inheritance tax in particular is one of those that I've coined in the vast majority of cases can be typically defined as a voluntary tax. And the reason we can say that is because there are very many mitigating opportunities available. Either people are just not aware of them, and generally then they don't get to take advantage of them. So really get to understand what are the options available to you. And with the changes announced by the UK for the expat community, the changes are quite significant. Lastly, just given the time that we have, I would say once you have a clear, defined idea of the opportunity available, the most important thing you can do next, and this relates to everyone who's operating under NHR as well, is take action. Generally, we have the affordability of some time to decide and sit and reconsider our options. But when there are fixed timeframes in place, such as with the NHR, it is very important to take action once you've decided to consider a course of action. Likewise, with any opportunities from an inheritance tax perspective, if we allow inertia to take over, unfortunately, none of us know the day that it is our time. And, when that happens, no action can be taken. And so, my advice is to follow that sort of framework, understand what the changes are, identify how they impact you, assess the opportunities and options available, and take action.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andreas. We're going to wrap it up now. Unfortunately, due to sort of connection issues, we've lost our Colleen and Vasco. So I'm just going to leave it to Paul and Andreas, really just to wrap it up for the audience and really just give your sort of key takeaways from today's webinar. Paul?
Yeah, I'll go first if you like. I think the key thing is talk to people that have walked this walk. Don't get stuck researching and relying on property portals. Have discovery calls with people that can support you. finding the right location, and do that in a way that, you know, is aligned to, you know, what you want to get out of life in Portugal. And for me, that is key, rather than, you know, just randomly looking at properties. You've got to do it the other way around. What do you want out of this journey, and then work it back from there.
Okay. And almost the final word to you, Andreas.
Yeah, I would echo everything Paul just said, and again, I would just add and reiterate: have a plan, have some structured approach. Yes, your intuition and your gut is going to play a big role in the final decisions, but have a strategy, have a plan of attack, weigh up the variables, recognize there's going to be compromises. Nothing is going to have all the things that you want all at the same place, all at the same time, and identify the order of priority, and then take action. Once you've taken action, you're in a position to then be able to move forward, and times will change. The important thing to bear in mind is, as time changes, having taken action based on a structured approach, you'll be very well positioned to assess, do you want to make a different change in the future? Such as, you know, if circumstances in your life changes, or other opportunities come about. Having gone through the process from a structured perspective, you'll be better equipped to make the decision next time round, potentially sooner, saving you time, money, effort, and everything else that goes together with it. But that's what I would say is the most important thing to play for.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul and Andreas, for wrapping up for us. Thank you for those that have stuck with us. Apologies that obviously we've gone over time. As you can tell, obviously it was a detailed subject matter. I'll just say, obviously, that if there's anybody that you would like to reach out to, just please let us know. Obviously, the contact us button is in the corner there. It just leaves me to say, with regards to our next webinar, as you can see on the screen there, is the mitigating future tax burdens well before your NHR ends, and that's on the 11th of March. And then a week later, we've got the impact of Portugal's golden visa residency by investment. So again, you know, if the team will have put the registration links up in the chat, but obviously please visit our website, www.portugalpathways.io/events, and you'll find the registration pages. Thank you again. I hope you found it interesting and insightful. As I said, we'll be sending out the replay along with the slides that we used within the presentation. And for those of you that obviously left a question and we were unable to get to it, apologies. The team will reach out directly to you and answer those questions and get those meetings set up for those of you that have requested them. So thank you and have a good evening.